Alright, so back to this. Yeah, and again, it actually has been not too long, but again, it's been a while, or a bit at least in context to the series, since we've made one of these videos, one of these black screen ones for YIIK, right? I just finished up part, I don't know what I'm at, I have no idea what part I'm at. I think like 37, 38. But again, jeez, I'm tired. But I finished that part, right? And again, we reached the point, because if you remember, right, what is this? The second black screen video for the second, or what I'm calling the second climax of the game. With the first black screen video we'd done, was for the first climax of the game. That one was like only, I think, 8 to 10 parts in, and now we're at like 37, 38, I think. So it's been a while, but again, that first one was for the first climax, right? My thoughts on the game then, but ever since, it's kind of been building to this second climax that we have now seen, and again, that's what this video is on there, and it seems like something from there on out to where we'll be heading towards, based on where we are in the game right now, and now how we're going by the day, system. It seems like we're building up towards the third climax and kind of the finale of the game there, or like the end game, so to speak. So with that, again, I've decided to, again, I've done my second recording of the day, might do a third, but again, this one's going to be specifically, again, for that black screen video on the second climax, right? Which, the second climax, what I'm referring to, basically us finding the android Essentia and then her taking us through her mind dungeon. To me, that is what, again, signifies the second climax of the game. There's no real battles involved, I guess, unless you count the Japanese guy, but again, it's more so just the whole process of exploring her mind dungeon to begin with is what I'm considering the climax, rather than that one fight specifically, similar to how the first climax, it wasn't just the fight with the golden alpaca, it was kind of, again, that whole, exposition or dialogue from, start to finish of that there, right? So a lot has happened between the two climaxes, but this one's going to be on this climax specifically, and again, more so just like how the first one, it wasn't even necessarily on the first climax, more so than my thoughts and opinions on the game thus far. This one, I'll start off with my thoughts and opinions and then work my way towards that second climax. So again, there's that, and then I'll do this once more once I'm actually finished with the game and have gotten at least most of the endings that I can, or what I can do from that point forward. So with that, right? Oh, Jesus, yeah, I don't know why I'm so tired. But again, right, something to work with. That's of the way we can actually get into it, and I'll kind of talk about the game from start the game, move into the climax itself. So here's what I'll say. From that first black screen video I made on the first climax, my opinion, because thoughts and opinions, right? My view of the game in sort of, I guess what's the term, this level of standing the standing they had the game in, as well as the level of tolerance I've had, has just, being entirely honest, has just plummeted, right? Like, when I got to the first climax, I said, okay, it's not a bad game. I don't think it's a bad game. Like that's basically what I've said, and I said it's not a bad game, but, and I remember specifically what I said, is that it's all the little things, right, that add up, where it's like, okay, this is what's preventing it from being a good game, and the only one, like, major downside I have is the whole gameplay mechanics thing, where it's a different fucking thing for every single minigame, right? And again, I basically said that's the major, minus, right? And then it's just a lot of minor, minuses that kind of, again, add up or culminate. And I said overall it wasn't bad, just wasn't great, and that these were the issues. Since then, again, it's like I even said, I think in one of the past parts, if the game were to make the worst decisions possible, I feel like that's what it ended up doing. Like, it made the worst decisions possible and went in possibly the worst direction it could go in. And I feel like I summed it up good in the last part, to where I basically said, the problem with the game, it comes down to a few things, and the overall diagnosis in, taking a step back, the more general broad issue is that, because this is what I've said, and this is more so I think the mentality that the game creators had, is that from top down, the game, there's no real depth, it's like it goes for width rather than depth, it goes for breadth, but it doesn't really develop or progress, like there's no depth to like the story or the characters. It all just, focuses on this surface level stuff and trying to be, a quirky pseudo intellectual, in the Earthbound RPG, rather than telling an actual story and having actual compelling characters. It sacrifices all that just, again, to be like this pseudo intellectual, surface level like game where it's like, oh, it's a game for intellectuals because it touches on, these topics and themes, right? But it's like, okay, sure, but the game's not fun, right? What's the point of playing a game if it's not fun or enjoyable or entertaining? I don't know what else to say there, but that's like the top-down level issue. And then what I said more specifically, and because that's something I've been saying for the longest time, what I've said in the last part and what I feel like that applies to, or more specifically within the context of the game, is that, the story, again, it constantly tries to one-up itself, right, by pulling the rug out from under you, each time, like, it just constantly one-ups itself, right? And it constantly tries to pull out the rug from under you, but it's like, the story isn't coherent. It just makes for a real, like, lack of coherent, story. Like, there's just no coherency, like, and it just leads to you, like, I'm not invested in it at all, whatsoever. I was invested when Semi-Pac first disappeared, but pretty much I'd say ever since we started looking for the android, I just lost any investment in the story, because at that point it's like, it feels like a game of side quests, like, where it's just we're constantly doing side quests and we're never at the main story. But the issue being, those side quests are the main story, right? And it builds up to this whole thing where it starts with just the disappearance of Semi-Pac and then ends with, okay, the universe is at stake, the multiverse. But it's like, it doesn't do it in a way that's coherent. It just constantly pulls out the rug from under you. It's like, oh, actually, there are more mysterious circumstances behind Semi-Pac's disappearance. There are these characters like Vela, for instance, right? You meet Vela, you learn about her, and then all your other friends, right? And that's like, oh, there's actually, this, all this art, like, it's constantly like an, oh, gotcha moment. There's this new factor or thing that's added, but it's like, it doesn't do it in a way that ties it into the story. It's just constantly throwing shit at you. It's like, dude, like, this isn't coherent. Like, this doesn't, like, again, it's just, you can't be invested in that. And it's why I've noticed, like, I just genuinely don't care. I just want to finish it, right? The most enjoyment, spoiler alert, the most enjoyment I got out of the game in a while is fucking watching the kissing scene between fucking Alex and then Essentia and Vela. That was fucking hilarious. But again, it's like, we've reached a point to where, it's like, I just don't care, right? And it's something to where, again, and this is what I said, and I've been saying this, the game had potential. It could have been an Omori if the game, because here's the thing, I like the 3D style, and I actually like, kind of how combat works in the game. The problem being, it's more the gameplay mechanics and, specifically, right? But again, it's like, if the game would have actually focused on having, a honed in, coherent storyline that it could follow. So let's say just stayed on the topic of Semi-Pac's disappearance, right? Rather than expanding into this multiversal thing, if it just stayed on that line and actually focused on developing the characters rather than having, quirky pseudo-intellectual dialogue. Like, it seems like every opportunity they have for character development, they just annihilate that chance to where, oh, Alex gained actual character, because he's an interesting character and had the potential to go through some great character development. Because again, the trope and stereotype of the disconnected from, the practical realities of everyday life type person is usually, it usually ends up becoming, or making itself apparent in like a character who's rich and powerful, and strong, right? And they are disconnected that way via the, struggles of like the common man or working man, right? But Alex is the exact opposite, and I felt like there was such, and especially because I feel like, funny enough, I feel like excluding everything that happened, just the idea and concept of Alex is a relatable character. Like, you should be able to relate to characters no more. Let's put it that way, right? But I feel like Alex could potentially be a very relatable character for a lot of people until you actually see him do shit in the game. But just the idea and concept of this kind of, sheltered kid who, kind of got a lot of what he wants but doesn't really know what he wants to do in life and is kind of spoiled in that way. It's like, I feel like to at least a lot of people, and at least to, kind of the target audience of the game, like that has the potential to be relatable. So when you sacrifice, actual potential character development for just, this quirky pseudo-intellectual dialogue, it's like, okay. Like, Alex has not changed at all during the game. Like, I don't know what else to say. His character has not changed. You have all of this dialogue, and this is what I'm getting into, and probably another big issue of the game, but he doesn't change. Same thing with the rest of the characters, right? Arguably, I'd say the only character who really changes is Vela. Like, none of the other characters really change. Michael doesn't really get enough. Okay, at the end, when he fucking transcends, but that's like, okay, that's a cop-out. And it's like, there was literally 0 point in that, right? Rory doesn't really change. I guess he becomes more remorseful, but it's still like he never really apologizes for nearly leading us into our deaths. Claudio and Chandra don't really change. They're met too late in the game to really kind of establish that. So Vela's really kind of the only one that changes. But again, it's like, and here's the problem, and the main problem is that the game does not understand show don't tell. Like, the game just fucking tells us everything. Like, every single piece of dialogue is just telling us. And I feel like that's why it feels so, like, repetitive and so just, what would you call it? Monotonous or, like, tedious, maniacal, right? It's like, it's just telling you, like, that's why it's like any time Alex monologues, I just bore to death, right? It's like, there's nothing, like, I'd rather it speak way less and actually, kind of, again, if anything, maybe, like, let's say, presenting, like, more choices, right, that could be used, because, again, our big thing is, like, choices are a thing in the game, but they very rarely, like, at least make an appearance or seemingly an impact, at least until the end, but it's like, maybe if we had, like, more choices and choices to actually, like, do something that would allow for, again, to express what he wants there, rather than just constantly monologuing, it's like, again, it's just something to where what that ends up coming down towards is, it's just, again, it's just like, the game's a mess. Like, I don't know what else to say. It's, it had potential, and it honestly wasn't too bad, at least when we reached the first climax, but playing since then, it's like, here's the thing. How, like, because I'm genuinely curious, right? Like, what the creators had in mind or wanted to do with the game. Because it also feels like, what would you call it? Like, it feels like the game's not a troll. I mean, but it feels like it's almost like a meta commentary or critique of the genre, but it's not smart enough for that. Like, it's not, like, I would want to give them the benefit of the doubt and say it's a meta critique or, like, commentary on, the indie genre as a whole, right? Because you know how critical I am of the indie genre, but it's clearly not, like, it's not like that, lackadaisical, like, and it's not that apparent. The game takes itself too seriously for that to be the case. So it's definitely something to where they tried when making this game. They wanted to make a good game, but the process is what happened. And I think it's just because they focused on, again, top down, I think they focused on, making a quirky pseudo-intellectual game rather than, okay, make a fun game and a game that tells a story. Like, two things that the game is very much lacking. But again, with that, right, and beyond that, what I also find interesting, and this is kind of moving more into the second climax territory, is kind of Essentia as a character, in her introduction specifically, just basically completely invalidating, the whole, because the whole reason we started, this journey, right, an adventure, is because we lost the grocery note and then met Semi-Pac. She got taken by soul survivors and we started looking for her. Basically, our entire adventure started with looking for Semi-Pac. Essentia's appearance essentially, funny enough, joke, right? Completely invalidates that. It's like, oh, I am, all these people. Semi-Pac is just one part. It's like, okay, so we spent the whole time looking for her, but in the end it didn't even matter. It's like, again, like, I very much, question why they decide to go that route. But then it's also like, okay, she's all these characters, right, combined, because they all share the same soul, but she's, again, one of them was smart enough to create a body that could, again, exist, in, what would you call it, inhabit soul space, that could go and experience all those different versions of herself, right? So it's like, again, like, you think Essentia, right, would be, if not, a villain, or I should say, like, anti-hero, or if not, one of our enemies, because I feel like that'd be a good finale, a person in one reality, right? They create an android that can go to soul space and observe, all of their alternate versions, selves, right? But just of the same soul. And then that android, again, houses or ends up housing that soul and ends up, going kind of AWOL and, having its own goals, motives, and agendas, and then we need to stop it. Like, I feel like that would have made for a more interesting story than wherever this is going, because now it's some, like, end is nigh, impending doom type stuff, which we're suspecting is alternate reality or world version of Alex, but who knows? But it's like, again, with that whole android thing, it's like, or at least it would be more of a force of nature, something that wasn't necessarily aligned with us, but more so, again, like, even if it wasn't our enemy, still had its own, goals, modes, and agendas, which it kind of seems like in wanting to take Alex, because Alex is very clearly an important character, right? I mean, he's seeming destined for destruction, that's his, like, fate, and he does things in alternate realities, right? So it's like, it's just this version of Alex that kind of sucks. So her taking him to soul space to potentially, what would you call it, grow to his full potential, I feel like is a very reasonable thing, and that's seemingly what she's trying to do. But it's like, again, I feel like it's just not made up by the fact that, she's being treated kind of like just another human being, which is a problem, where it's like, she's very clearly, this, like, very special thing. I guess it's interesting, because now they made Michael freaking transcend and go through the different doors of his past self, so it's like, okay, does that just invalidate, like, freaking Essentia? Like, why would they, I still don't understand that late in the game why they would have Michael do that. It just doesn't make sense. But with that, right, it's like, okay, like, yeah, it's just something to where it's like, with Essentia's character there, right, I just find it interesting that they went that route, especially because she's trying to, like, seemingly, like, it's literally just like she has a crush on Alex or something, and she's like, and it's like, okay, whatever there, right? And it's like, I find the most interesting thing being that Vela is part of her, but she still exists in our reality. Like, that to me seems odd. You'd think, and specifically since Vela was a soul from a different world, so it's seemingly like her soul is partially comprised of Vela's, which is from not even that world, but they both exist. So it's, again, it's just weird. And I feel like, again, because the game focuses more on, again, like, here's what I'll say. Because the game focuses more on, okay, just very surface level stuff, right? Being this quirky, pseudo-intellectual thing. The rules and laws of the YIIK universe are just not clear. Are just straight up not clear. Like, everything I've said has been inference. Like, there's no, like, continuity or, like, it feels like consistency in terms of, like, what it can and cannot happen, or what is and is not allowed in the game. Like, there's just, again, what would you call it? The lore of it, like, it's just, dude, like, again, it's just not clear. And it's like, that's something important, because it's like, okay, that then plays, it seems something to where it's just like, there's nothing that isn't off the table in YIIK. Like, everything is on the table, everything and or anything can happen. Like, nothing is off limits. And then it's like, okay, then why are we worried about this impending doom? And like, what else is like going on, right? Like, if it genuinely feels like nothing is off limits, and it's like, okay, and that's what setting those boundaries is so important for, because what can and cannot happen and or be done, versus this where it's like, okay, it just feels like they can do anything, and if there's no apparent answer, they'll just like, come up with one, right? And that's why I say, the story constantly tries to one up itself, right? It escalates, and it's just, oh, there's, this actually, right? Or, oh, there's that, versus like, okay, we have a concrete set of rules and laws that the universe must apply by. So we do, like, nothing can be done outside of those, or at least until the end, right? But this is just like, nothing's off limits, there's no hold bars, right? Or no holds barred. So it's just, again, that's the problem there. And it's like, sorry, I'm just adjusting and shifting, if you hear any sort of like sound or noise. But it's just like, I mean, it's hard. It's hard to play through this game. Like, I don't enjoy it. It's not entertaining. I don't like the story. It's not coherent. It's not fun, but I need to beat it. And this is another thing. I find and this is more so, again, not talking about the Climax specifically, but bringing it back. If they're going to include a 40-day, cycle, and include that game mechanic and function as a major part for the end game, seemingly leading up to the final climax, I don't know why they wouldn't just do that for the rest of the game. Again, I talked about Omori. Obviously, there's a day mechanic, but that it doesn't really, it's not really a mechanic, more so in just keeping time. Right. But this is very much a mechanic, so it's like, okay, why wouldn't you just extend that to the rest of the game and then build the game around that? I feel like that would make it way more interesting, but instead, all of a sudden, it's like, oh, you have these 40 days to prepare for the end of the world. It's like, okay, But again, it's just, because that's something to where it's like, yeah, I mean, I don't know. To be fair, though, what's funny is, I think, again, besides the whole Kiss and Essentia and Vela scene, we also get, again, we're seemingly on the most efficient track. We did our 7 encounters with our friends. We're going to explore the whole town and then just train in the mine dungeon. So, and it'll be interesting, because it's also something to where it's like, in the question that raises is, did none of our choices up until now matter? Is from here on out only when choices matter? And it's like, that'll determine what ending we get. Just who knows, right? It's just, again, not clear. And again, who knows there? It'll be interesting to see. But yeah, it's like, back to the climax itself. It's just something to where it's like, it's almost hilarious and funny, because at this point, it's like, I'm so not invested in the game that it's almost like the climax doesn't mean anything. Like, it's not like it's supposed to be some big exposition story moment that's like impactful and shapes the rest of the game, but I just don't really care, right? Like, and I feel like a lot of people don't, just because you're not invested in it at this point, because it's not good. And it's like, okay, congrats, there's this climax in exposition, but who cares, right? What do we do with it, right? Who knows? Again, it's almost like, I just can't wait to be done with this game, being honest. I feel like, because here's the thing, and this is where I'm going to leave this video off of, I was willing to give this game the benefit of the doubt. I gave it the benefit of the doubt. That's why I played it. Up until that first climax, it wasn't too bad. And especially because the moment that made me realize, okay, this game sucks ass, was when we started chasing the kid in the mall. And it played that shitty ass music, and the kid ran like a rat, and I was looking at it and thinking to myself, what am I fucking doing? What am I playing, right? That moment made me just... And then that whole sequence afterwards, leading to us, freaking fighting the Soul Survivor and fighting Essentia, like, that whole sequence just made me like, what the fuck is this? What am I playing? Like, it's just, again, not good. It's just, like, terrible there. But again, with that, I could talk about and ramble about more, but I'm probably just gonna end it here. It's already been 24, and I've talked about most of what I want to. And in the next one, the next Black Screen video we'll make once the game is done, But until that point, you know, this is it after the second climax, and I'll just keep on playing until reach that point. But with that, I don't really have any more for this one. So, yep, that's it for this one. See you in the next one.